Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Neville and welcome to Selective Imagery. Welcome to Thanks for the Memories, Part 12, the 1890s era Jonte Brevete 5x7 plate camera. We start off this episode of Thanks for the Memories going way back in time, in the early years of photography. Things aren't always that clear when you're trying to find out about old cameras. Eventually, things get in focus a little bit. This identification tag on this camera tells you that it was made at 124 and 126 Rue Lafayette. That's the name of the street or road in Paris, France. Made by Frederick Jonte with the words Brevete SGDG underneath. As we pull back, we see a camera that was made in the 1890s. A wonderful wooden example of what was technology back in the day. This camera has its original, as far as I can tell, original wooden tripod legs. There's another section that could be extended that has metal spikes sticking out of it. Obviously I shortened it up so I don't have the spikes sticking into my carpeting. And this is a 5x7 inch plate camera. We're going to give you a little tour around the camera here in a second. So from the side view, you can see that obviously it's a bellows camera. The knob on the lower right will move the bellows forwards and backwards for focusing. There is no shutter on the lens. I do not know the focal length of the lens. It is not imprinted on the lens. It does have an adjustment for f-stops. And the camera is basically wood and brass. As we look at the back of the camera, the rear view, you see the ground glass plate where your image will be, where that's what you use for focusing. In the foreground bottom, you'll see these little brass inserts that have like cutouts in them. I can lift the bellows section, the back part, the back plate that the bellows goes to, and reposition it farther along that piece of wood that glides back and forth. Here's the image of from the rear of the camera with the plate glass section swung out, which you have to do. Once you have acquired focus, you have to swing that door out, and then you have to put a plate holder and push it down into the back of the camera in order to take a picture. And I'll take some still photos to show you what these plates look like, or these plate holders look like, excuse me. This image is just of the double plate holder. You can put a plate on each side of this this holder. So this is just an overall view. Here we zoom into the top portion where you can see there's like a slider. It says like film back number 2. It says POSE, pose. So you could slide that so you know whether or not you've actually shot an image on that part of the back or not. This is an overall view with what they call the dark slide. Okay, you slide up that piece, and that's what covers up your dry plate or your wet plate, so it doesn't get exposed when you're transferring it to the camera. So I'll zoom in a little bit to talk about this a little bit more, but you slide that all the way up once you have it in the camera, and then that plate is exposed, ready to take a picture. Here we zoom in a little bit, and you can see when you look at the top, you see those 2 swing out brass little clips, levers. Those help hold down the plate. You insert it in and kind of like goes into a groove in the top. You drop it down, you swing those out to hold it down, and at the bottom you have 2 angular pieces, one that I have pushed out a little farther than the other. You can see the small pins on the bottom where they'll swing out and go so far, and then they hit a stop. But that's what holds that plate down, and you have those steel spring clips underneath that puts pressure on the plate, and those combinations of things keep it so that that surface is perfectly level, for when you go to make your exposure. This is showing you the rear of the camera with the dual plate holder partially in place, going down a slot that's in the frame on the rear of the camera. And here's with it all the way down. Now, of course, like I said, this camera does not have a shutter. So you would typically have a black leather cap on the front of the lens. Now at this point there is no typically this camera could be used, this holder can be used for either doing the wet plate process or the dry plate process. And from what I can tell, this particular example was used with dry plates because there's no residue anywhere in where the plate would be inserted that I would expect to see from the chemicals if it was used with wet plate technology. So these dual plate backs on this camera were used for dry plate technology from what I could tell. Now, they cannot be used for putting in a piece of film. Those would be different plates. I'm not sure if they were available for this camera or not, given the time frame that this camera came out on the market. So at this point, you had focused the image by moving the bellows back and forth while you're looking at the ground glass screen. You swing the screen out. You put in the dual plate holder after you've loaded the plates in. Right now there's nothing being exposed. You have a lens cap on the front of the lens, and I'll show you what we're going to do next. So you start to lift up on the shield, okay, that covers the plate so it's not seeing any light. So you start to lift up on that and pull it upwards. When you have it all the way extended all the way up, it actually folds back towards you and just has like a flap. It just lays over. Now you have that sensitized glass ready to, capture the image. So what would happen at this point is the photographer would remove the cap from the lens. He'd be timing. He'd already have his f-stop to what he wants. He would be looking at his watch, and then he would time it and then put the lens cap on after he got the exposure. So he has it capped, he takes it off, he starts to clock, he puts the cap or the bowler's hat over the lens to cover it up.
And then you carefully slide back the dark slide into the holder at this point.
And then you can pull out that whole plate holder and reverse it and take another image on the other side. At this point, I've extended the bellows a little bit more, but let's say I've adjusted that knob and I've got that bottom plate that moves back and forth, that bottom wooden section in the middle of the frame, out as far as I can go, and it's not far enough. Well, this is where I can slide and move that back frame off of that movable wooden plate, and I can move it up and connect it into these slots that you see on each side. Okay, so I can move it up and put it into those areas, which will stretch out the bellows even more. And here you can see it stretched out a little bit more because I moved it. The bellows are light tight. This camera is usable. A couple of those brass slots where I can move that back, forward and backward, have to get tweaked a little bit because I can't lock it in place well enough, but most of them work fine. So this is a working camera. I've done some research, and I have found a place that does still make dry plates. They're extremely expensive. For this size, I mean, just the plates alone would be more than $10 a shot, and that's not counting the chemical trays you would need. You'd probably need like at least 3 trays, maybe 4, one in a sink, because the process would be, you would put the glass plate in a developer and agitate it for a certain amount of time. Then you would put it in water and agitate it, and you'd put it in a fixer, and then you would put it in a rinse, put it in some water where you have water flowing into a tray. And so it is possible for me to actually use this camera in real life, and at some point in my life I may just spend the money and experiment and try to take a few pictures with it, just so I know what it was like to shoot a film plate camera or a plate film camera from the 1890s. A little bit more history. Frederick Pierre Jonte, he started the photography business in 1860. His company manufactured some of its cameras, but he also sold cameras made by other manufacturers. And I use that term manufacturers loosely, because typically in the early days of photography there were many entrepreneurs making cameras, and no one was really making them in large quantities. And they had various names on them, and some of them didn't have any names on them at all. In 1868, his cameras were made with Jose Maria Dominic, and near the end of his career he had 2 other partners, Jonte and Monte from 1890 to 1894, and Jonte and Deloy from 1889 to 1910. Now, Frederick Jonte passed away in, let's see, 1910. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. He passed away in 1890, and then his two previous partners, Charles Monte, tried to work with Mr. Deloyle, and in 1910, the company known as Jonte and Deloyle went bankrupt. And like I said, the nomenclature on this ID plate had the word Brevete followed by the letters SGDG. The camera was commonly called the Jonte Brevete, although the word in French meant patent. So the last sentence in the nameplate meant patent sans guarantee du gouvernement, which in those days was a patent without government guarantees. The camera was made in different plate sizes, 13 by 18 centimeters, which is equivalent to 5 by 7, which this camera is. The largest going up to a 30 by 40 centimeter,
which is 12 inches by 16 inches.
The larger cameras were double extension bellows. So a lot of the information that I'm presenting to you from various sources on the internet, but primarily from a site called Collect-A-Blend, and I want to give them an acknowledgement. And there's not a lot of information out there regarding this man, his company, and his products. As I said, mine came with a period correct tripod, multiple plate holders, double plate holders, and the brass lens, which has a built-in aperture adjustment, has no focal length markings on it or manufacturing markings on it. So I'm really not sure if this was an original lens or not. And since most cameras of this era were hand-built in minimum quantities, it is extremely hard to get detailed info on any cameras during this period of time. Many other models made by other entrepreneurs had lenses that would work on each other's cameras. For me, this is a type of camera I've desired and been looking for well over a year, a plate field camera from the 1800s. And while I enjoy many English models, I guess it seemed appropriate. I found one made in France where the first camera was made. So for me, this is a collector piece in excellent condition. It's going to be primarily for display only. I know it would work. I did pinhole check on the bellows. The bellows are relatively supple and there's no light leaks at all. And it's in really, really good shape. And that's about it. I'm going to show you one other thing, one other feature. You'll hear sometimes statements about cameras with backer boards. Well, the lenses in these days were mounted on backer board. This is a backer board right here. If I lift up on this lens, there's like behind this brass, you got two pieces of brass here, and in the insert for this upper piece, you got some springs, pieces of metal, you know, that act like a spring, and I can lift up and then lift out the lens. Okay, I could take out the backer board. Okay, now you can see the hole. So, you know, here's the backer board. Here's the back of it. So a person could have various types of lenses, and this backer board has a brass insert in it with threads, okay, that the lens screws into. Okay, so you could buy the backer board. I'm sure you could buy it with different size inserts or the same size insert and just have different focal length lenses. And like I said, this lens doesn't have any focal length information on it. And what's interesting is when I look at it closely here, the f-stops go from f8 to f64. f8 to f64. So to put it back in, you just tuck it in underneath, you lift up, it drops down, and the f-stop adjustment works fine. It is hard to get to the last two f-stops because I had to do some cleaning and some working of this knob to get it to move smoothly through most of the f-stop ranges. But if I wanted to use the last two, I really have to turn it pretty hard to get to the last two f-stops. But I don't see where I would ever be shooting at f64 anyway. And just for general information, the ISO range on the gelatin emulsion that you would have on a glass dry plate is like an ISO of 2. So I don't have any light meters that I can dial down to 2. So if I were to use this camera, I would have to do more research. And I know it's out there. I've seen it a few times. That'll tell you, okay, if it's a sunny day, set your f-stop to f8 and expose for X amount of seconds or X amount of minutes or what have you. And that is out there because I would not have a light meter. I don't have a light meter that goes down to ISO 2 to be able to determine what the settings would be. So that's about it. I hope everybody enjoyed this video. I'm very pleased that I found something that I've wanted for a while, and like I said, for the most part, it's a display piece, but it's a piece of history, and I love camera history, and I'm not a big history buff in general, but for whatever reason, I am when it comes to cameras. So I hope everybody gets out there and takes some great images. And thank you for watching, and take care, everybody. Thank you for watching my channel. I really appreciate it. Please give me a like and leave a comment, pro or con. Just please be respectful. And if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. And remember my motto: enjoy life, capture some of it, get out there and get some of your best images, irregardless of the genre that you choose to shoot. Take care and God bless.